Today we're going to talk about resume writing, which is a very important part of being able to get a job, since this is often one of the first things that people will see and can hold you back from progressing forward in the hiring process. So the purpose of a resume is that it provides employers and or recruiters with really just a snapshot of your career experience and highlights. So you're not going to be able to fit everything in here. You're never going to feel comfortable that a resume perfectly represents who you are. It's just your ability to get as much in as you can, realizing that you can't write a book about your experience, and people who are doing the hiring do not have time to read a book for each candidate. So it's the best of both worlds here, that you are as concise as possible, but descriptive enough that you provide enough information and examples and details to progress forward in the hiring process. And what it definitely will include is a summary of your skills and abilities and accomplishments. And sometimes people fear being too descriptive, but if you can be descriptive, we'll look at a couple examples. The more descriptive you can be, well, again, being concise, lets the person in the hiring position know that you are qualified for this job and if you would fit with the job requirements and expectations and fit with the company culture, etc. And hopefully it will entice whoever is doing the hiring into inviting you for an interview, because that's where you can really shine. So the resume and, if required, cover letter are the two things, one to two things that will get you to the next step. And then in the interview is where you can explain, provide more examples and more details, and hopefully demonstrate that you're a great fit for the job and for that company. And honestly, for a personal use for the resume is that it can help you keep track of your own work experience. And I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'll remember. I'll remember that. I'll remember that I did this. I worked this job. I did that. I had these job responsibilities." But over the years, you will forget things. And so it's really important to update your resume regularly, even if you're not on the job market. And I know some people will say, "You're always on the job market," but I don't subscribe to that, exact philosophy, but I think that you do have to be ready if you ever want to go on the job market, or if you, through circumstances outside of your control, are put into the job market. That this will help you be ready and remember all of the important things that you've done. And then at the very end of the presentation here, I'll give you an example of a curriculum vitae, or a CV, which is basically a resume on steroids. And it's more common in countries outside of the US to ask for a curriculum vitae. But in the US, we do tend to use it for getting into graduate school programs if you're asked for a resume or a CV, and also in the academic field. All right, so some resume content. What's required, what's optional. So what's required definitely is your contact information, and make sure that your contact information is correct, because there is nothing more frustrating than people in hiring positions trying to get a hold of somebody and having an incorrect phone number or incorrect email address, etc. You'll want to include your educational background, and usually if the field you're going into requires a certain type of educational background or certain degree level, certificate, etc., licensure, you want to make sure that you include that in your educational background. Otherwise, it can be very straightforward, just degree, level of accomplishment, years that degrees were achieved, etc. And also professional licensures, certificates, and credentials. Some of these are going to be required by jobs. Some of them are going to be bonuses. And there are some people who may be overqualified for a job. I'll just put it out there. Where, let's say, if you have a doctorate degree and you're applying for a job that is entry level in, let's say, working in human services, your doctorate actually could work against you. So something that you want to keep in mind with your educational background and licensures, certificates, and credentials is that if you are potentially overqualified, you need to think about what you want to include, because you can, I have seen people do it and be successful doing it. You can remove educational degrees, licensures, etc., that don't match the job and would potentially give the impression that this is not really the job you want. It's just a stepping stone, or it's something to tide you over. Those things could scare a company away from, even interviewing you. But it takes some thought, and it's definitely contextual and it's situational. And so I wouldn't give any kind of blanket statement other than it's something you could consider, particularly at the graduate level and up. And professional experience, employment history, definitely you'll have to include that, although we'll talk about to what detail and what you can leave off in a little bit here. What's optional is that you can include a link to a website if you have your own website, or if you use LinkedIn or another professional website where you can share more information. So generally what people do is they'll keep their resume to 1 to 2 pages in length, but then they'll also provide a website or a LinkedIn profile that gives much more information if people are interested. So that is something that you can do. Something that used to be more common but is now falling out of favor a bit is the objectives or qualifications statement. And it's usually that employers don't really care that much about what the objective is, or if you have a quick qualification statement, they're going to make that determination themselves by looking over your resume. And they do know at the most basic level what your objective is here if you're applying for a job. So some people fret over that statement, and I'll let you know that for most people going through the hiring process, that statement is kind of skimmed or skipped over anyways, if you choose to include it. You can also have a skills section where you include skills that you think are important to mention. So you don't want to include skills that everybody has, right? And we'll give some examples coming up here. And volunteer experience, even if you're not paid for work, you can still include it on your resume. You just want to make sure it's clear that it is volunteer experience. And that can definitely be to your benefit, just showing that you volunteer, because it shows that you care about something without needing monetary compensation. And then obviously any awards, recognition, or honors that you get. Nice little topping that you can throw on there if you have any. If you don't have any, don't make any up. So here's a very, very, very basic example of a resume. So this is completely simple text, no lines or tables or anything even to jazz it up. And this is perfectly okay. And this is showing that that objective statement at the top here, right after the name, contact information, is optional. And then going into education, work experience, and starting with the most current job, working backwards. That is the most basic. I don't know how much more basic than that you can get. Here's an example that's filled out with some real information. So there's a qualification statement that rolls into a table that is demonstrating skills and abilities, and they've lumped it into 3 positions here, 3 areas that they can bring. Education is included, and note, if you have not completed your degree yet, you can put degree expected and the year that you are planning to finish it. Keep in mind though that if you're applying for a full-time job, you want to be very careful with how you state that, so that people don't think you're too busy to work full-time, or that it's going to be competing with your education, etc. And if you have multiple degrees, you start with the highest or the most recent and work your way down. And then here's an example of the cutout of one of the jobs with bullet point list that we'll go over. Here's a little bit fancier of an example. Note it uses color, which in this day and age is more acceptable than it used to be, but it is possible that your resume is going to be printed out. Some companies have it totally streamlined, and you do not even have printed copies. But if you do run into somebody who's making printed copies, make sure that whatever is in color, like up here, that the difference in grayscale is great enough that they can actually read the words wherever you're using color. So I would recommend doing a test print in black and white yourself just to make sure that it's still readable. And so here we have rules or lines that are underlining the different sections that they've put together. They've done a split page here, so we've got a small column on the left-hand side and a bigger column on the right-hand side with the optional objective, statement of objectives, optional information about skills, which could take up this whole section, right? So this is blank, possibly because there's not that much to say, but if you have a lot of skills that you want to list, this would fill up very quickly, this white space. Then they have their work experience, their education, and their volunteer experience or leadership experience. And at the bottom, they have a very kitschy, use of here's email, here's my Twitter handle. Again, only share Twitter if it is professional and appropriate, or you're going for something like a social media manager or something like that. Telephone, LinkedIn profile, and they have these nice little icons for you all set up. And this is a Microsoft Word template. So when you use Microsoft Word, when you start a new document, you can choose a template, and they've got probably hundreds of these available on their website that you could look through and pick. And up here, typically, just FYI, typically people put their initials up here at the top. But I have seen some interesting choices. Sometimes people overlay a photo here or something like that. I'll talk about some of the drawbacks of that coming up. And here's an example of a resume template that I think is a little too fancy for what you need in reality. So just because you can be fancy doesn't mean you should be fancy. So number one, the photo. I would only recommend including a photo on a resume if you're asked for it. And I have only known probably 3 people that have ever applied for jobs who have had to have a picture either on the resume or included with it. And one was for like a veterinarian, and I'm not sure why a picture matters, but they specifically requested it in the job posting, so okay. So otherwise I would skip the picture. It's just not normal yet for people to include that much detail, and you probably have a digital footprint that they're going to be looking for anyway. So they're going to be, if you're a serious candidate, looking online, seeing what they can find about you online, on social media, etc. Everything else about this chunk is fine. Name should always be the biggest. If you want to put the job title you're applying for, you can. Education, work experience. What is a little unusual is right here, this skills section, which I would encourage you not to do something like this, where you list a skill and you try to indicate how competent or capable you are in that skill. So listing your skills and just saying, proficient at this, an expert in this or that, fine. But when you try to make it graphically pleasing, like this example here, turn this into a stacked bar chart of percentage of something, I'm not even sure, competency, comfort, I'm not sure, it's going to confuse the person who is looking at your resume. So it's just confusing to them to start with. What are you actually trying to demonstrate here? Additionally, you self-ranking yourself in skills and ability is not really helpful because people are not good at assessing or evaluating themselves. So what you think you're capable of, ranking yourself with percentages or dots, it's not helpful. All right, so from the earlier example, if you want to include skills, you can make sure that they are easy to read, so I would recommend bullet point list, or if you have a ton of things that you're trying to match up with the job posting. So for example, I imagine this job posting had 3 areas of competency they wanted to see from their job candidates. You could split it up with like a table very easily to keep it separate, that oh, here are the administrative support skills, here are the training skills, here are the communications related skills. And moving on to the professional experience or employment history, you do have a lot of choices that you can make when you're putting your resume together. First of all, I would recommend my following advice. It's not required. I'll usually tell you that there's an option to do it this way or that way, and then tell you why the preference is for one way or the other. So, when you are listing your employment history, generally the expectation is that you are doing it in reverse chronological order. And so that means that you are starting with your current job or your most recent job first, and then working your way backwards to your first job or whatever earliest job you want to cut off at. And the reason for that is that generally when people move through their life, their jobs get more complicated, their job responsibilities become more complex, and sometimes move up in the ranks, right, from entry level to an advanced level to supervisory position, etc. So that is the reason why most people start with their latest job, their current job, because that's going to show them in the best light as far as skills and capabilities. And then most people are applying for jobs that are somewhat similar to what they're currently doing. The exception for this would be a new college graduate who hasn't been in the workplace very much, or is switching fields entirely. That might not be true. But generally speaking, where you start, like way back with your first job, is going to be much further away from what the skills and job duties required for this job you're applying for will be. So for an example, currently I'm an instructor, and when I would list my previous work history, there are 3 jobs, 4 jobs, can't remember off the top of my head, that would be instructor related, teaching related. And then going back further would be writing related for newspapers. You know, poor newspapers. Everybody should worry about them going out of business. And then before that, it was more like college type jobs, right? So working for a college newspaper, being a bank teller, that kind of stuff. And depending on how far back you want to go, you can list all of your jobs, or you can choose to stop somewhere, either because of the amount of time or because the jobs are not really relevant to the job that you're applying for. So I'll let you know, my first job way back was working at Dairy Queen. And I was very grateful for the opportunity, thank you. But I do not any longer put Dairy Queen on my resume. It is just too far off where I am currently, and also year-wise is way beyond 10 years ago. So for those 2 reasons, I can very safely leave it off my resume. But with your resume, you want to make sure you can show at least 10 years of employment history, unless you have an exception like going to school, entering the workforce seriously for the first time, being a stay-at-home parent, and then going back to work. Those are all good exceptions. You usually want to show at least 10 years of employed history, and I would recommend showing at least 2 jobs, because if you have them, right, because that shows that you've been able to be employed by 2 separate companies successfully. So you are employable, right? That's great. So that would be my recommendation, is at least 2 jobs and at least going back 10 years if you are able. On my current resume, I have 8 jobs, and I go back 15 years. So that's my cutoff, is I don't go back more than 15 years. And that's also the point where the jobs become more like bank teller and completely unrelated to my current role and the type of jobs I would be looking for now. Company name and location is important information for them to know. So you always want to tell them who you worked for and where that was located. Dates of employment. This is actually really important and often done incorrectly. And people think, oh, I can just put years down. But in reality, what HR is looking for is as specific as you can get. So month, definitely. So I worked from March 2019 until April 2020. That lets them know that it was about a year of employment. If you just said 2019 to 2020, is that 2 years, 1 year, less? Are we talking December 2019 to January 2020? Is that 2 months? They really can't get a sense of that. So at least the month, and if you remember it, they encourage you to put the day down as well. So, job titles, you definitely want to use the specific job title you were given if you have one. There are some situations where people don't have formally recognized job titles. In that case, be honest and as accurate as what somebody would have called you in that position. If you have multiple job titles, I would recommend splitting it up either within that job or listing the job multiple times with your different positions so that people know what you were doing in the different roles, that it's not all jumbled up together. And you do have to include tasks, responsibilities, accomplishments. That kind of information lets the hiring person know that you have the skills, you have the history, you have good accomplishments that you can show if possible. Use quantitative data, numbers, percentages, ratios, etc. whenever you can. And then internship experience does count even if it's unpaid because you are doing it for a work-related situation. You are working for a company. It is different than volunteering, right? Because volunteering, you get some sense of, I'm helping my community, I'm helping people around me, etc. That you really don't get from an internship. The whole point of an internship is you're getting the skills, and hopefully you can get paid for it. But if you can't, it's unpaid. I would still put it under professional work experience. So a couple examples of how you can list your work experience. Over here we have the sentence style on the left and the bullet style on the right. And note they both use bullet points. No matter what, you should be using bullet points. Okay, so we have here the type of job, counselor at Concordia University in St. Paul, Minnesota, and September 2015 to present, meaning currently working there, and that this job would be the reason that they would be leaving this employer. And the sentence style has a sentence or so that describes what's being done there before it breaks into bullet points. So develop and oversee campus strategies to address the needs of Concordia students who are challenged by health, conduct, substance abuse, financial, and other issues that prohibit their academic and or personal success. That's what that person is doing, one sentence summary. Then there's a breakdown in bullet points. Advised a caseload of 300 undergraduate students. Established 360-degree first-year experience program. Facilitated the first-year college transition, etc., etc. And if you use this style, I would say keep your bullet points to about 5 bullet points or fewer because your sentence is taking up space and reading time. Over here we have a bullet point list style, which means there's no sentence summary of what was done. Again, though, it starts with the job type, registration clerk, where, and month, year to month and year so that the person hiring can get an accurate sense of how long you were in that position. And this one goes right into the bullet points. So notice there are more bullet points, but 8 or so bullet points is about how many I would recommend maximum for this style. And of course, the shorter you can be with each bullet point, the better. This one at the bottom, 3 lines, would be getting a bit long because it's a lot to read for somebody who's skimming over a resume. They're probably just going to skip it, right? But notice that each of the bullet points in each example starts with a verb. And if it is past tense, like you don't work there anymore, you have to stay in past tense for each of them. Worked with nurses, registered patients, troubleshot registration, adhered to, assisted patients, facilitated patient, handled communications. Okay. If you currently work there, you have 2 options. You can keep it in the past tense, even though you are currently working there, or you can put it in present tense. Work with nurses, doctors, and hospital administrators. Register patients for ER. Troubleshoot registrations. Adhere to HIPAA. Assist patients with, etc. All right. I would say when putting your bullet points together, put your most important bullet points that you definitely want them to read at the top, because the further down you go, the less likely the person is going to be to keep reading. So hit them with the most important or the greatest accomplishments at the top, and then work your way down to the least important. And if you're wondering what kind of verbs you can use, any verb, as long as it fits the work that you are doing. So here's a verb list that you can use for reference. There's tons of them out there on the internet. And basically just remember present tense or past tense for a job you're currently doing. Always do past tense for a job that you have left. And don't forget about transferable skills and soft skills. Those are important too. Even if the job posting does not ask for them, that is actually something that is important, and people try to assess more in an interview when you're in person or over the phone and talking with them. But it is important to also consider including soft skills and transferable skills in your resume. So soft skills would be like people skills, so communication skills, problem solving, critical thinking, leadership, being able to lead people, being creative, conflict management, etc. Those are different from hard skills, like being able to use Microsoft Office, right? That's a hard skill, technical skill. That's the difference here. And usually job postings do a good job of telling you what hard skills or technical skills you need, but they don't always include what kind of soft skills they're looking for in their employee as well. And transferable skills would be skills that are useful in any kind of job or most kind of roles. So there's a lot of them out there. Here's just a few, but coaching, training, leading, delegating, planning, conceptualizing, programming, willingness to do the work is a big one that people don't think is important. But yes, employers are looking for people who want to do the work or who want to learn, who want to develop, etc. And when you are putting your resume together, you will want to align it with the job requirements. So that means if you're doing a good job of applying, that you will want to have a different resume for every job that you apply for. Now, you don't have to completely rewrite it, but what it means is tweaking your basic resume. So keep a basic resume somewhere, in your computer, email, wherever, and then tweak it every time you're applying for a different job. And you definitely want to meet all of the minimum qualifications. That means these are things that you have to have in order to get the job, supposedly. And then there are often also preferred qualifications, the nice to haves, not the need to haves, that a company is looking for that would give you the edge over another candidate. I do want to point out, though, that you do not have to meet all of the minimum qualifications to apply for a job. You can throw your hat in the ring and see if you can get an interview, if you can, try to get the job. And there have been research studies that have found that men typically are more willing to submit resumes and cover letters to job postings when they meet, 80% of the qualifications. And women usually have a much higher requirement. They think they need like 95% of the qualifications to be met before they should apply to a job. So don't let gender identity get in the way. If you feel like it's worthwhile for you to apply for a job, even if you don't meet all the minimum qualifications, throw your hat in the ring. You never know what you'll hear back. All they can say is no or not respond to you in any way, which is possible. But you definitely want to try to meet all of the minimum qualifications. And when I sit down with people and go over their resumes with them, generally what I find is people will say, I don't have this qualification, I don't have that qualification, I can't do this, can't do that. And then I'll say, okay, well, let's talk about your job history. And then as they're describing their work, they're talking about the things that this other company is looking for. So just because you have different terms for it, or you consider it to be very entry-level work or a very small part of your job, doesn't mean that's not something that you would put down as meeting a qualification, right? However, if there is a certain amount of years that you need to have doing these different jobs or roles or having certain skills, etc., don't lie about how many years of experience you have. Don't round up more than like a month, right? To say, oh, I have 2 years of experience, if you really only have a year and a half, or if you really only have 1 year. Don't lie about it. Put down the accurate information, because HR or whoever is doing the hiring will probably be able to tell from your resume exactly how much time you have in a certain role doing that type of stuff. And lying on your resume is just bad, so don't do that. There are also certain things that you definitely do not want to include on your resume. That includes personal data, which is actually protected data according to the federal government and most state governments. So don't indicate marriage status, age, number, or names of children, religious preferences, cultural background, origin, what country you come from, etc. Don't put that down. Again, don't include a photo unless asked. References should be separate from your resume, so I would keep them in a separate document, keep them separate, unless asked for them right away or to have them as part of the resume. And avoid too many bullet points with too long of a job description. That is not something that you want either, because people will not read too many bullet points or too much writing. They'll just skip it, which is not good. And don't include lies or inaccurate information, because usually it comes out that this information is not accurate, that you may have lied about something, and you can be fired for providing inaccurate information in your employment documents, including your resume. What we have here is an example of a curriculum vitae, or a CV, which would be more common in countries outside of the US, or if you are applying for graduate school, or if you are applying for a field in academia. And it will be your resume plus some more information. So you would include, if you did any special types of service for your company or organization, including serving on committees, doing special projects, that kind of thing. You would include any publications that you have, so newspaper, magazine, journal, books, anything that you've published, you would want to include as well. If you are doing current research, you can include that as well. So if you are doing qualitative or quantitative or meta-analysis research, include it. And if you have presentations or readings that you've done, so if you've presented at other companies or done big presentations for your company or presented at conferences or did readings, if you are communications focused, you would want to include that information as well. And if you are a member of any professional organizations or have some kind of involvement in them, like you are a leader or you are somehow involved in helping to run that professional organization, you would want to include that as well. And your resume can be stopped many places along the way here. So just a few things to touch on. If you are applying for work at a big company or a company that does a lot of hiring, they may have an automated review process, which means that the first step that your resume has to get through is a computer looking at it and looking for keywords. So words that were used in the job posting itself, it will be looking for those words in your resume. And the important thing to remember in that case is that yes, you want to use the exact keywords, as many as possible, that were in the job posting itself. Even if there isn't an automated review process, the first step may be getting past an HR hiring specialist, and they would do that process manually, going through looking for keywords, looking for roles and jobs that match up with the job posting. So it can be stopped there, and you may receive an email that says, you don't meet the minimum qualifications. And unfortunately, sometimes even if you think you do meet those qualifications, you may get that kind of email. That is a sign, if you get multiple of those, to re-look at your resume and make sure that you're showing that you have those skills and abilities and work history. You can also get stopped at other places in HR. So recruiters, staffing specialists, hiring supervisors that play a role in HR, they create lists, which would be like the minimum qualifications list, the min qual list, or the preferred qualifications list. And if you are put in a min qual list showing you've only met the minimum qualifications, and there are enough people in the preferred qualifications list, your name and information may not even make it past HR to the person doing the hiring. So you want to make sure, if you have preferred qualifications, that you are indicating those so that you can get onto that preferred qualifications list and have an increased likelihood of making it to the person doing the hiring. And then you have to make it past the hiring supervisor or committee that is doing the hiring, and would be doing the next step, which would be interviewing. So they'll look through all of the applications, they'll look through the resumes, cover letters, etc. And you need to wow them enough with your skills, ability, and work history for them to invite you in for an interview. And hopefully you will do that, at which point you can shine, put on the charm, and show that you're a good fit for that company. So hopefully that you'll get hired. All right, good luck out there.